Hello and welcome to our Learn Python series. In this lesson, we are going to talk about how Python functions return values and then how can we use values returned from these Python functions. Then we're going to continue the discussion over the example that we've been using and write some functions that return values. So let's get into it.
In our last lesson, we talked about Python functions. We said that Python functions are named recipes, which can accept arguments like the recipes accept ingredients. And inside the function, we enclose all the activities that can be reused. And some of these activities may depend on the arguments that we pass. For example, we pass different class names and then the title was printed differently. So what I've done is that from the data analysis, the code that we have written, I have extracted the 8 steps that our execute class data analysis function can perform. The one thing that you will notice is that we have 8 steps. Some steps are about processing data, some are about showing the chart, some are about printing, and some are about analyzing it. So at the end of the last chapter, we said that the functions are not just about printing something or processing something. Let's see what that means. So the last step we have in our recipe or the function is called print footer, and we want this footer text. This footer text can be different depending on the requirement that what are we going to print. So let's define a function called get footer text. So we want a function to return us that what is going to be printed as a footer, and we say we are going to save, just simply say report prepared on and put today's date, and we want to format, so we will return year, month, and day. And now in our function, the bigger function or the main recipe, now we are going to call this function and we will say footer text is equal get footer text. Now, one new thing that we have introduced, that this function is using return footer text. That means this function is capable of returning us something. So what does that mean? Is that when we call this function is going to return us something that we can store in a variable. In this case, we have stored that in footer text, and then we printed that footer text. Let's execute our function and see what is the impact of this. So you can see that now the footer is nicely printed. Now, in our analysis, we perform some computation. We computed mean, median, standard deviation. Let's create a function called compute mean. And to compute mean, we need a list of data, and so that means the argument that we are passing is our list of data or array of data, and we say return np mean data. All right, you know what, let's make it a little bit more explicit and define a variable called mean and return that. Now, on the same token, let's say we want to return standard deviation. So now we have created two functions. One is computing mean, one is computing standard deviation using NumPy. How are we going to use it? If you look at the code that we had for data analysis, we computed mu and sigma for our mean and standard. Now we will replace the NumPy call with our new functions. We said compute mean, and we're going to replace this with compute standard deviation. Let's see. Now you can see that nothing has changed. Our data visualization still works, data analysis still works, but now we have replaced the direct calls to NumPy with the function that we defined. So far, the three functions we have defined, they're returning a single value. Functions are capable of returning more complex values. Let's create another function, say compute stats on the data, where we are going to return the mean and standard deviation together. So now you can see that we are using the previously defined function to compute mean and standard deviation inside of a new function called compute stats. So we are reusing the function to compute mean and standard deviation. Now, one thing you will notice that return is not just returning one value. It is returning mean and standard deviation together. It's a tuple of values. So how will this work? So when we call this, we can call it, let's call it we will say mean and standard deviation, and we will say compute stats. It is as simple as that, and let's see if this really works. Now you can see that in our printout we do actually have this tuple value being computed and returned. So now the next question you may have is this all that can do? Can it be even more other data structures it can return? Now we're going to replace this tuple with our object. Remember when we were processing student data from, we created these student object and we said student object is a dictionary which has the named keys. So let's in our compute stat functions, we're going to change it to return a stats object which has two named keys, mean and std. So now this function is returning us object, meaning a dictionary, and how it's going to be used, let's call it mean standard. We're not changing. The only thing now that is going to change is we can access these values by the named key mean and the named key std. So here you can see that now we have replaced the return from tuple to a object. So we have created 4 functions which are returning different kind of data, and now we are using our recipes inside recipe, or a function is reusing the other functions and those functions are reusing the other functions. So in subsequent chapters, in subsequent lessons, we are going to see that these functions can return even more advanced data structures, and in next lesson we will put all this together and create the functions that will perform the data analysis, and then we will see that how we are going to process data for at least 2 classes.
Thanks for learning with us. Do subscribe and like our channel. For more information, do visit our website. Till next lesson, take care. Goodbye.